welcome to OB today. I hope you're doing well. What we're going to be doing today is we'll be talking about the chapter on decision making. I think it's entitled Making Decisions, same thing. And in this, there are a couple major topics we want to take a look at today. The first of those are the models of decision making. There are a couple different models we want to take a look at. Of course, the names for each of them will be buzzwords for our class. The first major model that we want to take a look at is called the rational model. The rational model. And under the rational model, I have three major points I want to raise. And the first one, there's a four-step sequence in the rational model. Everybody tends to see it, etc. With regard to it, there's a four-step sequence. Let me tell you what those four steps are. The first step is you identify the problem. I've got to make a decision. There's probably a problem I have to solve. That's why I'm making a decision. Otherwise, I'll just sit back and let everything go as it is. So I have to identify the problem. And the second thing I want to do is I want to generate some alternate solutions. What are my options? I can turn left, I can turn right, I can go up, I can go down, things of that nature. What are my alternate solutions? The third step under the rational model is you have to select a solution of those alternates that you just came up with. Which is the best one? Which one fits the best with regard to it? Now, what you're doing here is when you're trying to pick the best one, you're looking for the one with the greatest value for you. Well, think about this. With regard to the fact that I already have a number of alternate solutions, another number of options that I can use to make the decision, how do I assign values to those alternates? I have three choices. I can go up, down, or straight. Well, how do I assign values to it? One of the things you have to keep in mind is when you assign values to things, sometimes you can use quantitative values, but oftentimes in management decisions, it's more than just quantitative. Oftentimes you're looking at, using, subjective values. And you have to keep in mind that subjective values differ from person to person and even situation to situation. So I might subjectively think that, the absolute best cookie is a chocolate chip cookie. But when I talk to my wife, she's going to say that probably the absolute best cookie is a peanut butter cookie. She loves peanut butter. So when you look at it, when you make decisions, because it's subjective, you're going to have different people coming up with different values and different choices. So you've got an interesting issue here when you go to select a solution. Obviously, you're probably going to have some people who are going to disagree with you. The fourth step of the rational model is now that you've made your choice, with the value and the subjectiveness, etc. Now that you've made your choice, you want to implement that solution, and eventually after you've done that, and maybe even as you're doing it, maybe one of the things you want to do is you want to evaluate the solution. Certainly after you've implemented the solution fully, let's evaluate it. But maybe as we go along step after step or something, maybe there's some times that we want to stop and say, is it working? We should make a change. So under the rational model, this is the first major topic, the four-step sequence. The second major topic under the rational model are some assumptions. The people who follow this model say this is the way we make decisions. They make at least two assumptions. I would argue probably more, but your textbook mentions the two that they do make. The two that they make, first, they make the assumption that managers are completely rational. Are they? How many managers have you had where you've worked over the years that are completely rational? Go to all your professors that you have, including me. How many of them are completely rational? Well, that's the first assumption. And the second assumption is that the managers, again, the decision makers, maybe that's a better way of saying it, have complete information. They know all the ins and outs, and they know all the information they need, and therefore they've made this decision, and based on that, the value is this, etc. We've decided on option 3 as opposed to 2 and 1. Well, again, think about that. How often have you made a decision when you didn't have all the information? You might have thought you did, but did you really when you actually came down to it? Maybe you learned something later. It's like, oh, if I'd only known. If I'd only known this, then all of a sudden, my decision would have been different. So those are the two assumptions. And notice those assumptions are very questionable. And let's go to the third and final point under the rational model. A very, very key point about the rational model. Even though these assumptions I just mentioned to you might be way off, even though the manager might not have all the information, and the manager might not be completely rational. I'm not even so sure what a completely rational human being is. But even if in that case, one of the things you should keep in mind, the key point here is that this rational model is the one that's used most often in business. At least it's said, people say they use it, whether or not they really do or don't might be up to question. But it's the one that you find in virtually every business situation. Somebody wants to use the rational model. That's either, as I say, the one that's being used or the one that we assume was used with regard to it. So that finishes up the first of these models, the rational model. Now we're still in this concept of models of decision making. So let's go to the second model. Actually, the second is going to be a set of models. These are called the non-rational models. Non-rational models. Don't you like that? How many people do you run into in the course of a day that you say, oh, great, there's somebody, there's X, he or she is non-rational. Well, now we have a couple of non-rational models, and with regard to this, we have at least two that we're going to be talking about in lecture. The textbook might have a couple of others you want to take a look at as well. Well, let's take a look at the first of these two non-rational models. The first of these is called Simon's normative model. Simon's normative model, oftentimes it's just referred to as the normative model with regard to decision making. This says, so under this, by the way, I'm going to give to you, I guess, three major points I want to raise. The first point that I want to raise, people follow this model, say this model is great, this is what we want to do, or this is the model that most people follow, etc., or should follow. This, people say that says, this model says that the process that managers use to make decisions, is guided by the decision makers. It's guided by the decision makers, and now I'm going to give to you a buzz phrase here, bounded rationality. It's guided by the decision makers' bounded rationality. Interesting buzzword there. What does that mean? Well, let's go to the second major point under Simon's normative model. We're going to define, first off, what the word bounded means. We're going to talk a little bit about it, give you some examples of it. Bounded means that there are constraints that are restricting the decision maker. Constraints restricting the decision maker. Keep in mind, under the rational model, we're saying, oh, you have all the information you ever need, and you're completely rational. Well, in real life, is that going to be the case? Or are there going to be some restraints on you when you go to make decisions? Well, examples of restraints, examples that will make your decision bounded, include, textbook gives you 6 of them. The limitations of the human mind. As bright as some people are, and perhaps as dumb as some people are, there are certainly restrictions on what we can do. Our brain is good, but it's not great, and we make errors. We have limited capacity, etc. So again, for one of the boundaries that we have in our decision making is the limitations of the human mind. The second example is the complexity of the problem. A problem that's not very complex might be easier to solve. We're going to use a decision making. Our decision making is probably going to be more reliable in that case, hopefully more reliable with regard to it than if it's really complicated. You have a really complicated decision. How do you pull all the pieces together? That's certainly an example of what a boundary on your decision making. How complicated is this going to be? The third example that we have is how much uncertainty is there. In life, there's not a whole lot of things that are certain. And there's a great deal of uncertainty. Sometimes there's a little, sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's so much uncertainty we have no idea what's going on with regard to it. So again, this third boundary to your decision making that we have, this is how much uncertainty is there. The more uncertainty, probably the greater the boundary. How far can I go? I don't know anything about this. It's uncertain. Let's go to the fourth example of a boundary, about the bounded rationality that you have. The fourth example is the amount of and the timeliness of the information you have. The amount of and the timeliness of the information that you have. Now, you can think of both of them, right? If I don't have much information, how good's my decision going to be? Or maybe if I have too much information, how good's my decision going to be? But the other point, too, is something we oftentimes don't look at until after the issue, arises after we've made a decision and all of a sudden everything's going bad, and that is the timeliness of it. How many times have you made a decision and then it's the next day, a week later, you find out some information, oh, if I only knew that with regard to it. Well, that's certainly something that's going to put a boundary on your decision making. I only can tell you what I have now as opposed to what I might get in the future. The next of these examples, and there's 6 of them, so we're on number 5 here, is the criticality of the decision. The criticality. Basically, if it's really critical, the pressure is on you. You've got to make a decision. It's got to be the right decision. And if you're doing that, if you're under stress, under pressure, if this is a really critical decision, life or death decision, maybe that's also going to put a boundary on your decision making. That changes things, doesn't it, with regard to how you make the decision and how good it might be. And then the last of the examples that we have of things that are, put boundaries around your ability to make a decision, the bounded rationality. The last of these are the time demands. The time demands. If somebody gives you something and says, oh, get back to me whenever you can, the time demand gives you opportunities to look around and figure out what's going to work and not work and try this, that, and the other. On the other hand, if somebody gives you something and says, I need it yesterday, come on, right now, let me go, give me a decision, what are the odds that you're not going to make a good decision because you don't have enough time? So that's another boundary that we have. So with regard to bounded rationality, we're talking about the boundaries that you have that limit your ability to make that really great decision. And the textbook gave you those 6 examples. I guess you could come up with more, but those 6 are really pretty good. Well, let's go to the third and final point under Simon's normative model. And that third point, this model says that decision making is characterized by. Decision making is characterized by. And they have 3 things that it's characterized by. I kind of mentioned some of these already, but let's take a look at it. Decision making, if you're following this model, on a normative model, decision making is characterized by, you have limited informational processing. Again, your brain is not that tremendous computer out there that they've developed, and you're going to make mistakes. So you have limited informational processing, limited information, limited ability to process it. Another of the characteristics of this model, of decision making in this model, is people oftentimes, managers, leaders oftentimes, when they make decisions, they use what are called, here's a buzz phrase for you, judgmental heuristics. Judgmental heuristics. Well, another way of saying it is that they have biases, judgmental biases. What are those? Those are shortcuts, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. Shortcuts to make it easier to come up with a quicker decision. And most people use them. Whether they're good or whether they're bad is arguable, but most people end up using them. So that's the second characteristic. And then the third characteristic of people who use this model, the third characteristic is something, another buzzword for you. It's called satisficing. Satisficing. Most of your decisions you have to satisfice. And what we're talking about here is the word satisfy, certainly a buzzword for you, is basically 2 words crammed together. It's the word sacrifice and satisfy. What we're talking about here is you can't make a decision without making some sacrifices. You don't have all the information. I don't have time to get all the information. I have to make a sacrifice here. I can't wait till I get all the information. I got to do it now. And when I do that, as I say, I've made that sacrifice because, again, I didn't have all these things I needed. I had that bounded rationality or whatever. When you do that, once you make a decision, you have to satisfy yourself with it. You have to say, that's the best I can do. So people who follow the normative model say, hey, listen, it'd be nice if we had the rational model, but nobody has all the information and nobody's perfectly rational. So under the normative model here, we're just going to have to satisfy and sacrifice. We're going to have to satisfy with regard to that. So that finishes up under the non-rational models. That finishes up the first of the 2 that we're going to talk about. Let's go to the second of the 2 that we're going to talk about. And this has a tremendous name for it. And when you think about people making decisions, particularly those who made decisions you didn't agree with, the name of this fits so well. This is called the garbage can model. The garbage can model of decision making. And certainly that's a buzzword too, like the normative model that we just had. And under the garbage can model, I have 4 points that I want to raise. 4 points I want to raise. This says that organizational decision making, in your business and school, whatever organization you have, that baseball team that you have or whatever, organizational decision making is a sloppy and haphazard process. It's a sloppy and haphazard process. The people in the rational models, oh yeah, we do this, that, and the other, and we're all set. Not so much. And the people in the garbage can model say, nah, it's pretty sloppy, it's haphazard. We try to put some nice frosting over it. We try to cover it up a little bit with some masks or whatever, make it look better. But they're saying it's a sloppy, haphazard process. The second comment that I have under the garbage can model, they say that decisions result, if normal decisions, people follow whether they want to or not, this garbage can model, decisions result from a complex interaction. Decisions result from a complex interaction between 4 independent streams of events. A complex interaction between 4 independent streams of events. 4 things are going to come together, and they're going to come together in a very complicated way. Those 4 streams of complicated events, the problem, certainly that's going to give you an idea of how I'm going to come up with a solution. That depends on the problem, right? The solutions, how many solutions are out there, what can I do, etc. with regard to it. The participants, if I make a decision and I'm sitting in a room full of people who really know their stuff about whatever we're talking about, odds are we're going to make a good decision. If I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people who are complete idiots, have no idea about this, odds are we're going to make a bad decision. So the participates in the decision-making process. And then the final of these independent events are choice opportunities. Choice opportunities. As you're doing something, how often does the answer kind of all of a sudden appear in front of you? Oh, there it is. If you've ever watched, for example, some mystery or crime dramas on TV and movies, and maybe read a book or whatever on it, oftentimes towards the end, the detective trying to figure out who did what, all of a sudden sees something, and someone's walking across the street, has nothing to do with the crime. Someone's walking across the street and they're wearing blue, and it hits them. My goodness, the person who was in the crime must have been doing blue or whatever. Choice opportunities, sometimes, it's luck. Things just happen that help you out with regard to it. So that finishes up the second of the 4 comments on the decision, the garbage can model. Let's go to the third comment that I have on this model. Decision making does not follow an orderly series of steps. People who believe in the garbage can model say, hey, listen, you can tell me all this stuff about rational decisions and we're going to do da-da-da-da-da. No, it doesn't. Basically, decision making does not follow an orderly series of steps. Oftentimes it's haphazard, as we said a little bit ago with regard to it. The last major point under the garbage can model that I want to talk about today is there are 3 practical implications. 3 practical implications that the garbage can model says or brings forth or etc. with regard to it. First of these practical implications, many decisions are based on the presence of an opportunity. They're based on the presence of an opportunity. For the life of you, you can't figure out how to solve this, and all of a sudden, just like that thing in the detective novel, you look up and there's our answer. Somebody walks through the door. Hey, he can help, she can help, etc. There's our answer. So many decisions are based on the presence of an opportunity. You might even put in parentheses luck with regard to it. Second practical implication, political motives. Political motives frequently guide the decision-making process. Political motives frequently guide the decision-making process. Oftentimes, particularly in business, you have a lot of politics, small p, not Dems, Republicans, not blue and red type of politics, but that office type of politics. And it's amazing. Once you get into it, you probably have already seen it, but once you get into it with your full-time careers or whatever, you're probably going to see more of it, and that's not good, where people make decisions, and it's based on the inter-office politics that we have. And then the last of the 3 practical implications is they say that important problems are more likely to be solved than unimportant ones. Important problems are more likely to be solved than unimportant problems. This kind of goes back to what we said a little bit earlier with regard to one of the models about the criticality. How, is it a life and death decision? If it is, we're probably going to have to make a decision. If it's not a big deal, maybe we can postpone it. That's kind of what they're saying here. Another way to look at it, you probably have heard the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is the mother of invention. Basically means when there's a great need, there's a necessity to come up with a solution. We're going to invent one. We're going to be innovative, creative. We're going to come together. We're going to find that solution, etc. And that's kind of what they're saying here. Important problems are more likely to be solved than unimportant ones. Well, why? Because they're important. We got to get them done. If we don't, all of a sudden we're going to lose our job. The business is going to go out of business, whatever it might be with regard to that. Now, still with regard to this concept of decision making, the last of the main topics I want to take a look at here is I want to take a look at something that we alluded to a little bit earlier. And that was these decision-making biases that people have. Again, they called them judgmental heuristics earlier. So let's talk a little bit about this. I'm going to give you more of a formal definition of judgmental heuristics. And I'm going to give you some examples of these biases that people have, the heuristics, the shortcuts, so to speak. Let me start off then by giving you the definition of judgment heuristics or judgmental heuristics. Either would be fine. These are rules of thumb or shortcuts. Rules of thumb or shortcuts that we use perhaps unconsciously to reduce information processing demands. These are rules of thumb or shortcuts that we use perhaps unconsciously to reduce information processing demands. I don't have enough time in the day to make all the decisions. I got to find a way to make quick decisions. These shortcuts help us to make a quick decision. Now, one of the things I'll mention to you is they help you to make a quick decision, not necessarily the right decision. So these are these shortcuts that we have. You might hear people say, oh, he or she jumped to a conclusion. Well, how did that person do it? They used a shortcut. They used one of these biases to jump to the conclusion what the answer was. And if you use a shortcut, then it's probably not going to take you as long to get the decision. The problem is, it's not necessarily the right one. It might be, might not be. So let's take a look. I have 8 examples. The textbook gives you 8 examples of these biases, these heuristics that we have. I'm going to use the word biases just because that's what we tend to say more often than not in everyday language. The textbook uses the word heuristics probably more often than biases. I think you can pretty much use them interchangeably, certainly for my class you can. So let's take a look at these. And each of these, by the way, each of these 8 that I'm going to give you, the name of them is a buzzword for you. Let's start off with the first one. The availability bias. The availability bias. Again, your textbook uses the word heuristic, and that's fine. And again, you can use it interchangeably. Well, what's this one? This is basing decisions on information that is readily available. This is basing decisions on information that is readily available in someone's memory. In someone's memory. I don't even know if you have to even add the in someone's memory, but that's usually what we do. I don't have time to go look it up. So I start using my brain. What happened before? There's a mystery writer from the 20th century named Agatha Christie. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She was really popular. She wrote, I'm going to guess, hundreds of mystery novels, and many of them are good. I've actually read a couple of them, and there's been a couple on TV and in movies or whatever. And she's really, really pretty good with regard to it. One of her characters, she has a couple of detective characters in a lot of these, and one of her detective characters is an elderly lady by the name of Miss Marple, M-A-R-P-L-E, Miss Marple. And one of the things that you see in the Miss Marple books and movies and TV shows or whatever is oftentimes as she's trying to figure out who, she's an elderly lady, a kind of a spinster, I think they call her in this, and as she's trying to figure out, who's the murderer or whatever in this particular mystery that you're reading, one of the things that she oftentimes does is she will compare characters that are involved in the current mystery, in the current crime or whatever, with people that she grew up with back in her hometown. Oh, You always heard the butler did it. Oh, the butler in this case. The butler is really like, Steve or Jane, someone I went to school with. And this is what that person would do. So what she would do is not always spend a lot of time learning about the butler. She'd just start to use the information she had from the past. This is the availability heuristic. It's basing her decisions on information that's readily available, usually in your memory. It also might be something readily available, right there, it walks through the door or whatever. Let's go to the second of these biases. It's called the representation bias. Representation bias, and by the way, these can all be plural or singular, it doesn't matter. Or again, representation heuristic. This says that we have a tendency to assess the likelihood of an event occurring. We have a tendency to assess the likelihood of an event occurring based on our impression about similar occurrences. Based on our impression about similar occurrences. So when we're looking at making a decision and we're looking forward and what's going to happen, my crystal ball's got to tell me what's going to happen in the future, because if I decide X, there's going to be a certain set of events that are going to occur because I decided X, or if I decide Y, there's going to be another set of events that are going to occur because I decide Y. So I have to kind of predict the future. Well, how do we predict the future? Well, we use representation heuristics. We look at what happened to us in the past. Oh, you know what? In the past, most of the time when the sky was cloudy, it rained. So as I'm looking in the future and I see clouds forming, you know what? I think it's going to rain today. We don't know. We might not have even listened to the weather report, but we're basing it on what happened, the probabilities in the past. Maybe something was highly probable in the past, or maybe it was very improbable in the past. We use that to kind of predict the future and to help us make decisions. Let's take a look at the third of these heuristics or biases. It's called the confirmation bias. The confirmation bias. And it says here that one first subconsciously decides something. One first subconsciously decides something before doing an investigation. Before doing an investigation. One first subconsciously decides something before doing an investigation, then seeks to get info to support that point of view, while discounting info that says that point of view is wrong. So this is what we do. We think, oh, you know what? If I make this decision, I think what's going to happen is blueberries are going to be falling from the bushes tomorrow if I make this decision. So because I've already made that decision, then I'll go out and I'll start to do some research on blueberries and when do they fall. And as I'm doing the research on blueberries and when they fall or whatever, now I'm going to find some information that's going to say, yep, they're going to fall just when you predicted, Fogarty. But I'm also going to find information that says, you're crazy. They're not going to fall because of this, that, or the other. They're not going to fall tomorrow or today. It's going to be a week from now or whatever. Well, what we tend to do is we look for that information that supports us, says, hey, yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right. You're confirmed. That prejudicial idea that you had is now confirmed because of the information you found. And then all that other information we found saying, no, that's not what's going to happen. We tend to push it aside. We tend to downgrade it. We tend to say it's not credible, maybe not even bring it up with regard to that. So that's called the confirmation bias. We look for things to confirm our bias, and those things that don't confirm, well, we try to push them away. Let's go to the next of these. It's called the anchoring bias. The anchoring bias. Here, a decision maker is influenced by the first information that he or she received about a decision. A decision maker is influenced by the first information he or she received about a decision, even if that information was irrelevant. They're influenced by the first decision, even if that information is irrelevant, and then they anchor subsequent judgments or decisions on that early information they got. And then they anchor subsequent judgments or decisions on that early information they got. The easiest way to talk about this, the easiest way to give you an idea of what I'm saying here, is you've often heard people say, oh, first impressions are the most important. Well, think about this. What we're talking about here with regard to anchoring bias is something along the following. You go and you meet somebody at maybe it's a party, maybe it's a sporting event, maybe it's in a class, and you just meet them. You've never met them before, you just meet them. And for whatever reason, they make a big impression on you. Either they make a really good one, oh man, this person's great, or they make a really lousy one, oh my gosh, get that person away from me, I can't stand that person, go away. What the anchoring bias says is that in the future, as you make decisions based on that person, you're going to oftentimes come back to that first impression, that first information that you processed, and you're going to basically say, that person is, and if you initially thought that person was good, you're going to say, the person has to be fine here. Whatever it is, yes, I agree with the person. If you initially thought the person was bad, no matter what the person says, you're going to think the person's, horrible, and, push that person aside, etc. with regard to it. That's called the anchoring bias. The first information through the door oftentimes. Well, let's take a look at the next bias, and this is called the overconfidence bias. The overconfidence bias. This says that we have a tendency to be overconfident about estimates or forecasts. We have a tendency to be overconfident about estimates or forecasts, particularly when we're asked moderate to extremely difficult questions or we're facing moderate to extremely difficult decisions to make. We tend to be overconfident. Why is that? Part of it goes back to our upbringing. Most of us have been taught to think positively, and to believe in ourselves. Yeah, we can do it. Whatever it is, we can do it. Think positively, believe in yourself. So what happens is, because we're overconfident, we oftentimes don't look at the pitfalls, maybe don't even look for pitfalls with regard to it, make a decision, and then our overconfidence oftentimes means that we proceed, and because we didn't see the pitfalls, the potholes in the road, we stumble over them. A really good example of this goes to the movie that we saw in class called Pirates of the Silicon Valley. Remember how Bill Gates was sitting outside a building with Steve Ballmer, and they're waiting for a cab to drive up with Paul Allen, who was at the time had bought, you might even say stole, the what would become DOS computer language, computer program, the operating system, the DOS operating system. And Ballmer looked at Bill Gates and he said, what, are you worried or whatever? And Bill's response was similar to the following. He said, sure, I'm worried. He said, success is a menace. It fools smart people into thinking they can do no wrong. Success is a menace. It fools smart people into thinking they can do no wrong. Basically, it means they become overconfident. And at least according to Bill Gates, that overconfidence can be a menace. It can be a problem in coming up with the right decision. Let's go to the next of these biases, number 6, right? There are 8 of them, so we're on number 6 here. And this is called the hindsight bias. The hindsight bias. And what this says is that our knowledge about how something turned out, influences our belief that we predicted or knew in advance, what the outcome would be before it happened. Again, our knowledge about how something turned out influences our belief that we predicted or knew in advance what the outcome would be before it happened. Great example for you with regard to it goes to a buzz phrase that you might have heard people use that was called the Monday morning quarterback. The Monday morning quarterback. This buzz phrase is old. It came out before we had NFL games on Monday night. It came out before we had NFL games on Thursday night, etc. And all NFL games are basically played on Sunday. So what you would tend to find is people would watch the game, whatever your team was. You're rooting for, the Steelers. You're rooting for the Patriots. You're rooting for the Raiders, whoever it might be. So you're an avid fan, and you're watching the game. And as you're watching the game, all of a sudden, you thought your team was going to win, and darn, your quarterback, whoever he was, threw this interception, blew the game at the very end, etc. And you can't believe it. Why? Why did he throw that? Well, the next morning, Monday morning, of course, they watch it on Sunday while you're home, on weekend vacation, so to speak. You got to go to work on Monday, and you're talking with others, before work starts around the coffee machine or the water cooler or whatever, and everybody's lamenting, "Oh, I can't believe we lost a game. Oh yeah, our quarterback really blew it," or whatever. And what you tend to hear is people say, "I knew that safety was coming over. Everybody could see that safety was going to intercept it. Didn't you see the person slow down and fall?" No, he didn't. Nobody did. But after you've now learned what the answer is, you now think, "Oh, you're so bright," because you start thinking, "I knew that before it happened. I knew it way back then." So that's what we're talking about here with regard to the hindsight bias. Let's go to the next of these. Number 7, the 7th bias that we have is called the framing bias. The framing bias. This says that we consider risk about gains, differently than we consider risks about losses. We consider risk about gains differently than we consider risk about losses. So how a question is framed can lead to a certain answer, can lead to a different decision. Again, we consider risk about gains differently than we consider risks about losses. So how a question is framed can lead one to a certain answer, to making a certain decision. And again, it's due to this bias. Think about this. Remember when we were talking about motivation, amongst the different types of motivation, when we're talking about need theory, we mentioned that one of the types of needs, the kind of two sides of the same coin, you had people who are need to achievers. They always want to get things accomplished. Yes, give me more, let's go forward here, etc. And then you also have people on the other side who are afraid of failure. Oh my gosh, oh no, I don't want to do this. Something's going to go wrong here, etc. with regard to, I don't want to fail. Whatever, I don't want to fail. Well, think about this. If you have someone who's a need to achiever, and you phrase a question, well, you know what? If we make this decision, the odds of us having a 10% return increase dramatically. Now, you frame it that way to a need to achiever, he or she's probably going to jump for it. On the other hand, someone who's afraid of failure, you say, oh my gosh, if we make this decision, the odds that we're going to, lose our shirt, we're going to lose 10% of the value of this, are immense. That fear of failure person, the radar is all up, etc., and starts to make decisions based on that need to achieve, or the fear of failure that we have. So sometimes think about this. Decisions are made not because of what the issue is, but rather because of how the issue is framed. Did they frame it in a positive way or a negative way? Did they look at risks of loss or risks of gain with regard to it? Well, let's then go, that was number 7. Let's go finally to the 8th and the final bias that we have here. And this is called the escalation of commitment bias. The escalation of commitment bias. And what this is about is the following. We oftentimes see that some decision makers, some leaders, some executives, us as people, oftentimes we might have a tendency to stick to an ineffective course of action, stick to ineffective decisions or stream of decisions, stick to it, right? Even when it's unlikely that by doing so, we're going to turn a bad situation into a good situation. We stick by it. Why? Well, we've already made decisions and said we're going to do it. Let's not change course now. Don't change course in the midstream or whatever here. Even though all the evidence is coming in saying, oh, don't do this. Turn around. Stop. Oftentimes we continue to plow forward here. In fact, we might even go faster. We might escalate our commitment. So we stay committed. We might even escalate it to go faster because everybody's telling us to stop and we don't want to do that. So this is called the escalation of commitment bias. Basically, it's saying in your mind, we've gone too far, we can't turn around, we can't go back. We've already spent so much time and money. If we go back, it's all lost. We have to plow forward. We have to turn this into a success. So you plow forward, and sometimes you even go even faster, even harder. You escalate that commitment. A couple of examples for you here with regard to this. There was a movie out, oh gosh, probably 40 years ago, with Tom Hanks, and I think an actress by the name of Shelley Long, if I'm right, I'm not sure. And the movie was called The Money Pit. The Money Pit. And what it was about is a young man and a woman got married not too long after they got out of college. So they were probably just a little bit older than you folks, and they got married, and they decided that they wanted to buy a house. They didn't want to lease or rent or anything, and wanted to buy a house, but they didn't have enough money. So what they're going to do is buy a fixer-upper. And they were going to turn this fixer-upper into this grand palace or whatever, into their basically into their nest, to have children, etc. in the future. And they bought this, and they put some money in to repair it, and they put some sweat equity to repair it, and things still didn't look too good. So okay, listen, let's put in some more money. Let's put in some more time. We'll fix this. We'll fix that. And when they went to the next step and they did that, well, now it still wasn't looking right, and all of a sudden some other things started to break, even some things they just fixed. It's like, oh, okay, well, let's not give up. We can't give up here. We've already put in a lot of time and money. Let's go forward. And then they try to fix some more and fix it. And of course, by the end of the movie, it was a comedy movie. Of course, by the end of the movie, the house fell apart or whatever, and fell down or whatever on them. What we saw there was this escalation of commitment bias. We've gone too far. We can't turn around now. We have to, continue on with whatever decision we had. And in many cases, people not just want to continue, they just say, well, the only reason we're failing is we're just not doing it hard enough and fast enough. So they just speed up, and they escalate this. Basically, what we see here is, think about it again as a child. We were basically taught, don't be quitters. So if you're not quit, okay, I can't quit. I got to go forward. I made the decision. I can't quit. We've been told to believe in ourselves, right? Hey, everybody's going to tell you you're crazy, but you believe in yourself. Don't let them tell you what to go on. You have to believe in what you're saying. And we've also been taught to be persistent. Be persistent. Don't give up. Keep it going, etc. And that, unfortunately, sometimes leads us to this escalation of commitment bias. Well, that finishes up what I wanted to cover in our lecture with regard to decision making. Now, there's some other parts of your book on other models and other parts of decision making, and you certainly should take a look at it. I think you might even find some additional notes that I have on the web with regard to it, and that are more than what we just talked about. Certainly look at that stuff. But again, I wanted to give you this foundation, and hopefully the lecture today has been able to do that. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me, through my email, etc., with regard to it. But I hope that by going through it now, you have a better idea of different types of decision-making models, how people make decisions, some of the problems they have with it, so that as you move forward and you're making decisions, particularly once you get to that level of your career where you're a manager, an executive, a leader in the business, if you have a little idea of how you make decisions, maybe on occasion, maybe you might pause a little bit more before making that final decision. Think a little bit about this. Am I overconfident? Am I using this bias or that? Do I believe everything's rational when the world's a garbage can or something like that? You just might want to think about that before you make that final decision. Let's face it, in business, you have to make decisions all the time. You can't spend all the time, analyzing everything. You have that paralysis by analysis, so you have to make a decision. Sometimes, though, this additional information on decision making, sometimes it might make it a little bit better for you. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture for today. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Hope you have a great afternoon and evening coming up. I'll see you folks later. Bye.